Welcome to the Biz Podcast. We are talking this season all about confidence and changing the rules and breaking the rules and finding the ways that we can really step into confidence within our business so that we can find the more money, the more enjoyment, all of the things that can come with business and that we thought business would look like, but maybe felt like it hasn't been coming. And today's episode, I have Stephanie Sewell with me, and I'm going to introduce her in a moment, but we're going to talk about learning and how that impacts us our whole life and how understanding how we learn can just change so many things about how things work in our lives, business, home, all the things. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Stephanie. Stephanie Sewell is an independent education consultant and speaker. She works both individually and in groups with families around the world, identifying and navigating education pathways that allow the whole family to thrive. Stephanie's background as a retired homeschooling parent, former school teacher, and education researcher combines with her heart-based, well-being focused approach to working with clients. She is a sought-after speaker both in Canada and internationally. And to add to that, Stephanie is somebody who has helped my family figure out homeschooling and learning and how to really connect with my kids and understand what's going on with them so that they can enjoy learning and education as opposed to not, which has been part of how things have been going for us. So welcome to the podcast, Stephanie. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Lara. I'm really glad to be here.
So we're going to talk about learning. We're going to talk about learning because, and this happens with, a bunch of my clients, but, having worked with you where you're talking to parents and to kids and teenagers about learning, and I'm talking to adults about their businesses, and you're like, wow, there's like an awful lot of overlap here. And it's because we learn our whole lives.
Totally. And it's so interesting. We often talk about lifelong learners, and in school context, we'll say we really want to raise kids to be lifelong learners. And the more I do this work of kind of taking apart what is learning and what does learning look like for each person, I almost feel like life and learning are just synonymous. Like the concept of saying a lifelong learner is almost redundant, because if you really think about it, think about going through a day. And good luck going through that day without actually learning something.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean you're going to learn something academic or, something that's obviously learning. But if we actually go back over a day and think, how was our day? What was our experience? There's always going to be something that you learned that you'll bring forward that will allow you to experience things differently or make different decisions the next time.
Right, which is the perfect introduction to the idea that learning isn't just one thing. So if you think about learning as how you did it in school, and it's a lot of read this book, listen to this lecture, now show me that you learned it by either taking a test or writing a paper, like that is very like, listen to me, I will tell you the thing, and you're going to tell me that you learned the thing. And that is a way, but it's not like the only way or the best way for some people to learn.
Totally. And I think for me, one of the key things about learning that is often absent in the conversation is our desire to learn, our consent to being in that learning context. And, it's such a simple little phrase, but yet if you take that phrase as having some validity, and then you look at school, you can't help but go, because if we think about ourselves as adults and what it means to consent to be in a learning context, it's pretty obvious, right? Like, I signed up for ski lessons this winter, so I consented for the coaches to give me feedback on my skiing technique. Easy. But when we think about kids traveling through 12 years of school and consent in that context, it's not as obvious. So then we start to think, well, like they're kids, like we need to make sure they learn this in order to be functioning adults. And that's fine. But when we get deeper into that and we start thinking of the learning that is then required because there's going to be a test, and is that particular piece of information or that concept or that skill actually necessary for each one of those children? Of course, it's not, because we can explore all kinds of ways of how, there's lots of things we have to learn at school that we don't wind up using later on. And then it just starts to feel a little bit less clear. And that to me is a really interesting point to be at in a conversation or in a family when you're thinking about what your kid's education path might look like. Or even if, maybe your kid's totally happy at school, but they come home one day and it's a beautiful day and they really want to go play outside, but they've got this like math homework that they have to do, and it's an either or. Starting to think about consent and owning our learning and things like that as a parent gives you a different place to come from in deciding with your kid, well, what are you going to do for the next hour? Are you going to go play outside, or are you going to sit down and do that math homework? So it's, to me, this conversation around learning and linking school and learning and adults and learning, like just putting it all together into a big pot and stirring it up and looking at what comes out, is exciting because it has so much potential to influence how we see our kids and their journey through education, through childhood.
Yeah. And I think that it's even interesting to look back at our own learning experience, right? I get a lot of information thinking back about what school was like for me, which, by the way, was terrible. Like, I did not enjoy, did not consent at all. What worked for me, the learning styles that worked for me, the ones that work for some people that don't, like all of this information that I can gather from looking back at my own experience and my children's experience, and then all of my clients as they're learning things, helps me to see why so many people are frustrated. Because the ways we come at things, the ways we decide to do things, the way that we are given information to learn is very varied, but it's also, none of it is a one size fits all. And that's part of the thing I really wanted us to touch on, right? The whole, when we stop thinking that the way we think something is supposed to be is the only way, we open up the possibility for like a million other things. And that's true for our kids, but it's also true for us. It's true for us as adults, as we're trying to learn doing new things in our business. And I think it just as much applies. If you think you have to learn something and you're like, this is terrible and I hate every minute, and like how hard it is to do that, versus if you can come at it from a place where you're actually interested, or you feel motivated, or you're doing it in a way that can make you pay attention, like it changes everything, even when it's the same topic.
Absolutely. And that's the consent piece, right? It's like, am I consenting? You might decide to do this really boring course on how to do bookkeeping because you've been doing bookkeeping in a way that's caused you stress and frustration and angst for years, and you're finally ready to just do it properly. And so you sign up for this course, and even though it's not your thing, it is your thing because you've consented to it. So I think that idea of getting to choose how you learn something that you need to learn is really important. And within that, something that we have as adults that we don't really think of kids having is the corollary to consent, which is the ability to stop consenting. So as an adult, I can sign up for ski lessons, and if I wind up not liking the coach or whatever is not working, I can just stop going. Easy. As a kid, even if you're thinking, okay, well, my kid likes school, like they're choosing to be there, they don't have the option to leave. I'm looking at my 17-year-old who just got her driver's license, so is like stepping into the world of adulthood in a really important way. She gets to drive a vehicle at 100 kilometers an hour down a road and all the repercussions that can have. Yet, if she wants to leave school early, I have to write a note, an email, giving her permission to do so. So we have this, a school context takes away a lot of our autonomy and our ability to make decisions because it's just not allowed. Like somebody has to give us permission, or we have to ask to go to the bathroom. And I think what happens for a lot of us as adults is that experience carries over into our adulthood. And I found this particularly fascinating because my school experience was really positive, I thought. So I liked it. I got really good marks. It was fine. And it took me a long time and a lot of reflection and a lot of work in this area to understand that my default was always to please others. It was really difficult for me to do something that made sense for me, but perhaps wasn't what I thought the other person wanted me to do. And that has affected my ability to learn things as an adult. And as I've started to be able to take that apart and see it, it's freed me. So one of the things, when we're talking about adults and running our own business and all of that kind of engagement with learning and needing to become proficient at things, it's really interesting to look back at yourself as a kid and think, how did you engage with school? And sort of related is in the world of alternative education, people who are really thinking about self-directed learning, so meaning that we're looking for ways to give kids more autonomy and more agency in their learning. A majority of people who are working in that field seem to have gone through school in the way you described. Like, I hated it. A lot of them are like, yeah, I was a dropout. I got really bad marks. I was always skipping school. Like, I resisted. A minority are the like, oh, it was fine. I did everything I was told and got good marks. And so I think that's really exciting to just have an awareness of how we were as kids engaging with this kind of stuff. And then noticing what our tendencies are when we have to learn something, or if we have a boss, how do we respond to that boss as an adult? I bet you're going to get information about it and maybe clarity on how to positively change it if you spend some time thinking about how you were as a kid.
Yeah, that whole thing is fascinating because I think, when I think about adults, there are a lot of them who don't think that they can just be like, the skiing lesson, I don't like it, I'm going to stop doing it. They don't believe, right? So when you said that carries over, like they're waiting for somebody else to tell them it's okay to stop. Because if you don't keep going, you failed, and failing is terrible. And it's like this deep conversation around all of that. But I never really felt like that, right? I was like, I am going to do everything I can to stop doing this thing because I think I don't want to do it. And if I don't want to do it, like, it's just really, really hard to get me to do something I don't want to do. And that did carry through in my work life. And it's one of the reasons that I left many jobs that I left. I wouldn't get fired, but I'd be like, I'm out of this job, right? You seem to think, and I mean, that's the joke now for me, is that I didn't like working for other people because they seemed to think they could tell me what to do. And when they gave me like a really long rope to go and just do what I wanted to do within a certain like framework, I would do a lot, right? I would be like, this thing, I want to help you on this project. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And the more they were like, well, we want you to do it like this in this time frame, I'd be like, oh. And then I couldn't start. Like, once I was being like told, like, nope, come in here. I was like, but I don't think that's interesting. And so being a business owner has helped me get to do the things I find exciting. Like, we need to find balance. Obviously, there are certain things I don't love to do and I still need to do them, but I get to follow my own passions. I get to follow the things that interest me. And that's why being a business owner is such a good fit for me. But there's still that cloud of should, this is how, right? That, and I'm probably better than the average person at ignoring it, but it's still there for me. And for some people, it is really loud. And for some people, it's really quiet, and understanding that that's all part of how we impact how we move through things and how successful we feel. And all of that is an important piece of understanding how we're motivated.
I think one of the things that I've learned a lot by working with you and being in this field is the importance of being willing to give something a try, being curious. Like, I'll just try that. And if it doesn't work out, I'll stop it, or I'll do something different, or I'll modify it. We don't usually get to just try things in school because when you do something, you're usually being evaluated in some way. Either it's homework that you have to show that you did correctly. Nobody can help you with it because that would be cheating. You're doing a test. That sense of like, let's just try this. We sort of have it in science classes in school, but the reality is that most science experiments have predetermined outcomes in order for the students to learn a particular concept. So it's not true experimenting. So I think when we've moved through a school system, we have a lot of experience thinking that there's a right way to do something. And if you don't do it the right way, then you've done it the wrong way. And that's a failure. And so as adults, like that can be so paralyzing. So paralyzing. And naming that, like recognizing that as an adult, I think can be very liberating. It's really hard to shift, but just realizing, oh, I don't have to have researched every single skiing class that's available and made the decision about which is the best one for me. I can go and try that one. Associated with this, of course, is a letting go, right? Because if I sign up and I try it and I'm 3 sessions in and I don't like it, I'm going to lose my money. So there's also that sense, again, of like, it's okay. Or maybe it isn't. I mean, you have to make those decisions within those contexts, but it's often okay. And again, go back to school. Are we ever told that it's okay not to do well on this test? And, I am working with somebody right now who's in the last year of high school and is registered for more classes than are needed to get a diploma. And there's stuff going on where it's difficult for this person to put the usual effort into all of these classes. This person can actually fail 3 of the classes that they're doing right now. Nobody's ever going to see those marks. The next education institution they'll be at is just interested in, do you have a diploma or not? But in spite of that, in spite of the fact that this person's life will be dramatically improved by stopping working on those 3 subjects, it's not something that's offered by the school as an option. You can get to that point by asking questions and figuring it out and realizing, okay, so we can tell this student that they can stop doing anything in those classes. But in schools, we just don't think like that in a school institution context. And so it does become up to us at some point during our lives to try to start thinking that way of, I can try this, I can let this go. Oh, there might be like a 0 or a 30 or whatever, but it doesn't matter. And to actually try to separate yourself from that, like, no, but it's a bad mark. Like we don't have any experience, any teachings around that as we grow up, around putting our well-being first. We're used to these external determinants, external ways of determining our worth.
Yeah, we think there's one way because we've always been told there's one way and there's one outcome and the test and the grade and that's what we want, and the best, ability to tell them that you learned exactly what they told you instead of going down the other way, right? Like this kind of I want to do it my way, not your way, is not the way we're taught to do things. Like, just learn it my way and then you can figure out your way later. Versus what I do a lot of, and like that's like the tagline around my business, is like, I want to help you find your way, because I know there are like 20 different ways to get where you want to go.
Yep.
What if we stop just looking at the one way? And like the way you're talking about from school, and it's how I think we've all learned, and some of us internalized more than others, that doing it without help is the most impressive thing, right? Like, wow, you didn't need to ask any questions. You didn't need to go and get a tutor. You didn't need to do this with somebody else. You just got it. Like, you are impressive. And like, why is that the measure?
Yes. In life, we collaborate. if we imagine somebody whose best skills are around doing everything themselves, and think about what their work path will be, probably a majority of work paths would not be a good fit for them. And yet in school, it's the opposite. We're focusing on the individual being able to do it themselves. And interestingly, going back to this working for someone versus working for yourself, in school, you do work on group projects. And you often have your group assigned to you. Or you can choose from the people who are in your class. So that collaborative experience often is, again, it's held within a very specific context that you don't have full control over. Whereas when you move into your adulthood, if you choose to have your own business, you get to choose who works with you. You collaborate as much as you want because you're getting to choose who's working with you, and you can keep trying until you find the right fit. So that's, again, something that we have to unlearn a lot of our school-based experiences in order to relearn or to discover what it truly means to collaborate.
Yeah, even before you mentioned that piece, but I was thinking that, right? So we're taught really that it's more impressive if you can figure things out alone. Then we're put into group situations without really the tools to know how to collaborate, because we've all been taught to just do our own thing and do it well and be responsible. There's always, the one person who's like, I had to do all the work, versus thinking like, what if we just come up with everything together? And that's where, right, my group coaching has a bit of that, but one-on-one coaching has a bit of that. And just like in general, I want to have conversations with people. And I know I have people in my life who learn better that way, right? If you just talk to me or you just ask me to read a book, watch a movie, whatever it is, like the chances of me staying focused are slim, right? But if we're like, we're just going to talk about this, we're going to have a conversation and we're all going to be engaged in the conversation, then for some people, that's like really amazing. And I think before we started recording, we were talking about how different people learn and how different people like to ingest information and how different types of classes work for different people. And there's just so many different ways. And I think you said what there are like 9 learning styles. Is that what?
I think it's 9. I always forget the exact number. It's Howard Gardner and his look at kinesthetic learners and visual learners, and all of those different kind of identified ways that we tend to learn. And I think this is work that's been around for decades. And when I was doing teachers college, like in the mid 90s, we were asked to consider different types of learners in our lesson plans. And it's interesting because it's great. It's great that you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do a lesson on blank, and I'm going to make sure we've got this for the visual learners and this for the spatial learners and this for the auditory learners. But ultimately, the drawback of that, or the limitation of that, is it's still all coming from the teacher. The teacher's responsibility to provide for all these different learners. We're not giving the student, who's meant to be the one learning, we're not giving them very much ability to harness their own sense of self and their own abilities to engage with material in the way that they choose to in that moment. Because maybe, at the first day of the week, you're more a visual learner. Your brain needs to be woken up from the weekend. And maybe by Friday, you just don't want to look anymore. You just want to listen. So, maybe there's a bit of variety like that. But where I get really excited about self-directed learning, which is the idea of it's coming from you. So, we have examples of that, or things like, when do you actually want to learn to read? Some 6-year-olds are ready and want to learn to read. Some 10-year-olds are not ready and don't want to learn to read. And we've got lots of evidence to show us that whether you learn to read at 5 or 12, you're still a competent, wonderful reader at 13. Like there's no necessity around when you have to learn something. So this idea of being a self-directed learner, I think, brings the responsibility back to where it belongs, which is the person themselves. And from there, by starting to help kids understand, well, if you're in this class and you're going to learn some history, how does that work for you? Like, what are your ways of learning it? By really turning that upside down. And we can look back to when our kids were really, really little for examples of how this makes sense. If you think about when your child was learning to talk or walk, you didn't decide that they should start learning that and start teaching them. It came from them, and they used the environment that they were in to learn those skills in the way that made sense for them, without you ever needing to discuss that with your 6-month-old as they were learning to sit up or whatever. And we lose that once we get into a conventional school system. And I'm really excited to start looking at ways of reintroducing that, so that you can be at school, but you're using school as a tool for your education. And we don't see enough examples of that, in my opinion, but we do see examples. One example is my son homeschooled all the way until grade 7. He went to school for a year. He decided he wanted to return to homeschooling. And then he went to school for grade 12 year. And so he was in and out of school a couple of times by choice. So when he was sitting in those grade 12 classes, some of which he found really interesting, others of which he didn't, he had chosen to be there. So he was able to manage whatever aspects of those classes he might not have liked or found more difficult, because he was there for a reason that he had chosen. He'd put himself in that context. And he also knew that he could choose to not aim for a 95% in such and such class, and he could choose to drop another class. He had other options. It was his way of thinking that had developed over the years. So I think the wonderful thing about bringing it back to us and to valuing who we are as learners and as livers, that sounded very strange, as people who live, it allows us to really try different things and get curious about it and not see it as failure, to see it as trying and as moving through life and learning.
Yeah. And I think that the reason that I think this conversation is so interesting for both, children in school, parents, but also business owners and all adults, is how many things we can see when we look back that didn't feel good, that we have the ability to change now. And whether that, you think about it from the point of view of why was it like that, therefore I want to change it for my children, is one thing, but also just how do you change it for your current situation? And whether it's deciding that you want to do things in collaboration, I don't need to do things alone anymore. Whether it's I don't need to follow all the rules, whether it's failure isn't a scary thing and I need to practice believing that, or whether it's, I'm not going to sign up for a class that is completely without deadlines and nobody's going to know I'm there because then I won't do it, versus I'm going to come to a class where it's always in community and people are going to notice I'm there because I'm going to have the accountability I need and the discussion I need to feel good about it, right? There are different things that you can learn about yourself so that you don't put yourself in a place where you're like, now I have to do this thing I don't like, but instead choose the things that you do like.
Yeah. And so a lot of the teens that I work with are people they've come out of school because school wasn't working for them, and they might have been experiencing anxiety or trauma or depression, or just really like not being able to make themselves go anymore. And that's exactly where we start is, okay, well, what did school feel like? Let's get into it. Like, how did you feel when you had to raise your hand to go to the bathroom? Like, that's kind of a crazy thing when you think about it, for a 14-year-old or anybody to have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. How did that feel to you? And how did it feel when you were having to do group assignments and you weren't feeling comfortable with those kids, or you weren't interested? Starting to take all that apart and pairing that process with, when are you excited? Is it playing video games? Is it when you're skiing? Is it reading a book? Like, is it conversations with your aunts and you get really like finding all of that is a way of it's a way of going through that process of looking at how things have been and what your patterns have been of engaging with learning context and engaging with your shoulds and shouldn'ts and what is success, what is failure, and just starting to allow something to reemerge. And so I think it's I often, in a lot of ways, I think that kids or teens who drop out in favor of starting to direct their own learning, it's a real gift. Like, it's a tough thing to go through. If they wanted to be in school and they just can't be, it's really hard. And at the same time, how wonderful to get to figure this out about themselves at this age. And, you know, if they choose to go to university, they're going to be stepping into that context with a completely different mindset and set of interests and desires around it than they would have done otherwise. Likewise for kids who, you know, their parents are seeing like they come home and they're stressed and whatever, like we're just going to pull them out. Helping those parents to understand what does this look like and what does this mean that your kid is getting to learn and experience now that will carry them well into their adulthood. So when we haven't done that, when we haven't had that experience as kids, at some point in our adulthood, we're hopefully and probably going to go through a bit of a crisis of like, who am I? And, you know, sometimes it's a midlife crisis, right? Sometimes it's retiring. If you've gone school, university, work, 60, boom. What on earth does my life look like? I have no idea how to direct my own life. So I think it happens to the vast majority of humans at some point in their life cycle, that they get to unpack some of the shoulds that have been in their lives and find their way back to their core and to leading from that. And so it's just really interesting what's the catalyst for that to happen? Is it that you've got a kid and they're struggling in school, so then you start thinking about them? And, you know, I'm always helping parents to think about themselves as well in that context. Is it that you got fired from a job and you have to think, well, what actually just went on there? But no matter what it is, this process of thinking about learning and how learning happens for us and what our sense of success and failure is, it's amazing to do that. It's so wonderful. And it helps us in all aspects of our life. Like, I'm sure that the people that, well, I know from experience of having worked with you as a coach and your other, you know, your clients, that yes, you're working on their business with them, but it's totally affecting every aspect of their life, including probably how they parent their kids. So it's wonderful to be having these conversations and exploring these ideas.
And letting go of I'm not good at this and saying, how could I be good at it? Or do I desire to be good at it? Or what way could it work if I stop thinking I'm not good at it? And I think that's where it reaches way out. And whether it's a midlife crisis because you don't think you have to suddenly fight everything that's true because you don't want it anymore, right? To me, that's a midlife crisis versus a midlife sort of awakening where you're like, which is what I think more people are going through now. Instead of having to like collapse and break out of the rules, you're just like, you know what? I'm going to break out of the rules and just do what I want, and not in a like, I have to like come at it with boxing gloves. The more we can understand ourselves and be okay with who we are and how we do things and find the right path for that, the happier we are. And that's what I think I've learned about myself. It's what I've learned about supporting my kids. It's what I've learned about supporting business owners. You're not wrong. You're not broken. You don't need to sit in shame that you're not good enough. What is the way that's going to work for you? What's the way that's going to feel good? What's the thing that you're not going to have to feel like you're in battle for constantly? And that's learning styles, and it's breaking through the rules of what's supposed to be together so that you can find like a path that feels less scary and traumatic.
Yes. And I want to pull a word out of what you just said, which is the word happy. We I think are in the habit of discounting the value of happiness. And you and I have read, or in your case, listened to the same book. And I'm hoping that you're going to remember this phrase better than I'm remembering it, because it's the book, The Dark Horse. Those who are watching. And in there, they talk about what happiness was originally defined as in when the Constitution was created. And I think it was more connected to the idea of fulfillment. I'll look it up and maybe put it in the comments afterwards. So I think happiness is it's not given enough value, because we tend to, like with kids, it's like, well, sure, like, I know you want to go play outside, but you should do your homework. Yeah, you really love reading and writing, but you're not that great at math, so we're going to get you a tutor for math. We value the hard work of getting better at things you're not good at in school, rather than just like wallowing and exploring and coming alive in the things you are good at or passionate about or drawn to. So as adults, I think we get caught up in like, well, happiness, like, sure, it's like, yeah, like marry the right person, be happy with them, but like, you're not necessarily going to be happy at work and like housework. I mean, it's just like, you just have to do it. But if we look at happiness as being connected more to fulfillment, which is connected to being who you are, because if I try to be you and you me, it's not going to work out, and we're going to have two people who are not fulfilled, not happy, and not able to bring their gifts to the world. But when we switch it back and we do what each of us wants to do and shines at and loves doing and is passionate about, well, then we see, a lot of families being helped, a lot of kids finding their way that were lost or feeling lost. In your case, we find business owners whose lives suddenly start to make sense and whose businesses start to take off, because we're focusing on fulfillment and being your best you, and recognizing that you don't have to be everything well, but when you are you and you do that well, and there's a bunch of other people doing what they do well beside you, and the world's in a good spot. So when we can take, like, to me, it's like, can we take that back to school? At what point do we say, follow your passion more? We sort of do it in high school with different courses, but it's a little bit of lip service, realistically, and different provinces have different levels of freedom and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, to me, that's a really big shift for parents when they think about their kids, and for adults when we think about ourselves, is, where's my good spot? Where do I serve the world best and serve myself best? Because then I can serve the world best.
I love that. And I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up for today. I think that, we could talk about this for hours. As you know, there's just so much about trusting ourselves and asking ourselves what we desire, and learning who we are, and following that path, that I think can change so much for people. And so hopefully this was a good discussion for some people to just start exploring it and thinking about it for themselves, but maybe also for their kids. And if somebody listening is interested in finding out how you could support them with their children and their learning, how can they find you?
So the best place to go check me out is on Facebook right now, with Stephanie Sewell Education. I also do have a website, which is going to get updated one of these days, but that's a good spot as well. And I'm always happy to book a free call just to chat and understand what's happening for your family, and I can let you know how I can support your family specifically.
Perfect. So we will put all of the links into the show notes. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with people when it comes to learning? And I think we covered a lot of it, but is there any final thought that you have that you want to leave people with?
I think the one to leave people with is an invitation to be curious about the contexts, the ways in which you love to learn something, or to do something. And an invitation also to bring that awareness into your engagement with other people in your life, your kids, your parents, your colleagues, anybody who's connected into your life, to gently be aware of humans as having their places in which they shine, and to help those places to come out, even when it might mean going against or differently engaging with an institution like school or like work or whatever it is. Have the courage and the gentleness to explore focusing on well-being rather than the expectation.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It was my pleasure.